read to you what his op-ed is, and you can get the gist of what he's saying. Be thinking about his words, and then in just a few minutes when I'm done reading it, I'm going to open the phone lines. And I'd really love to hear you folks' opinion on this. Here's what he says. FoxNews.com headline, Evangelicals need to stop being wimps. He says, quote, in July of 2012, I was speaking at a youth retreat in the mountains of Tennessee when I received a call from CNN. It seemed that Chick-fil-A CEO Dan Cathy had publicly commented on the issue of same-sex marriage, and now the gay mafia were out to destroy him and his restaurant chain. So CNN asked, would I be willing to come on and to offer the Orthodox Christian perspective on homosexuality and defend Chick-fil-A in this controversy? Well, after reviewing Dan Cathy's comments and concluding that they were not outrageous, they were not biblically incorrect, I agreed to the interview. And then later that day, I defended the Christian position on CNN as vigorously as possibly at the time I had. Shortly thereafter, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee called for Christians to mobilize and to show their support for Chick-fil-A with Chick-fil-A Appreciation Day. Folks remember that? Well, they did. Lines at the restaurants stretched for blocks. This event marked the first time I could remember Christians fighting back rather than just meekly submitting to the media and special interest bullies. But not all evangelical Christians were supportive of the home of the chicken sandwich. In an article for World Magazine, Barnabas Piper, son of prominent evangelical pastor John Piper, wrote this. He wrote, quote, I will not be attending Chick-fil-A Appreciation Day on Wednesday. Here's why. Convictions, especially biblical ones, will divide people. That is inevitable, but not desirable. The separation of believers and unbelievers when it happens must be a last resort or an unavoidable result. Actions to the contrary, those that clearly promote an us versus them mentality, are most often unhelpful. There is a time for Christians to engage in boycotting, such as when a business deals in obviously immoral areas or is clearly unethical in its methods. But for a mass of Christians to descend upon Chick-fil-A restaurants across the country tomorrow to support the leadership's view on this issue is, I believe, a bold mistake. End quote. Now again, that was the position of Barnabas Piper, son of the well-known evangelistic pastor John Piper. Well, Larry Alex Taunton then goes on in his piece to say this, quote, I was stupefied by these remarks from Barnabas Piper. Piper is young and was no doubt well-intentioned here, but brother, if you can't be relied on to show up and order a combo meal in support of a company under attack for its commitment to Christian principles, when exactly can we count on you? This wasn't about the leadership's view on homosexuality. This was about the biblical view of marriage and society. Besides, Huckabee wasn't asking Piper or other Christians to die for their faith. He wasn't asking them to take to the streets or to destroy property as protesters on the left have done in places like Ferguson and Berkeley. No. He was asking them to do nothing more than eat a chicken sandwich and some waffle fries for Jesus. Has any protest in history been easier or tastier? Taunton goes on. A generation ago, pop star Bonnie Tyler famously asked, where have all the good men gone? Well, since then, the situation has only gotten worse, Bonnie. As C.S. Lewis noted, men in the English-speaking world have largely been emasculated, and men in the church are seldom an exception to this decades-long trend. To stand strong for one's faith in Jesus Christ and push back against a culture that, in the words of Isaiah 5:20, calls evil good and good evil? Well, to fight against this is to somehow be, quote, divisive or unloving or bigoted or intolerant. This is because evangelicals have confused Christ's command to love others with somehow being likable, as if that were an attribute of God. Well, it isn't. As such, they endeavor to be, above all else, inoffensive and polite. Well, I'm a child of the military. I was born at Fort Benning, Georgia, and grew up in such places as Fort Gordon, Fort Campbell, and Fort Lewis. The idea of fighting for things that matter has never been foreign to me. I fully recognize, as the Athenian statesman Pericles observed, quote, happiness depends on freedom, and freedom depends on courage. My father, a career soldier, had a phrase he liked to employ whenever he saw a man behave in a manner that was less than manly. He would say something like, that was candy blanked. And he says, yes, the A word here, the A word, A-S-S-E-D. That was, well, you can figure it out, okay? Rhymes with grassed, okay? That was candy blanked. He goes on. Of course, my father didn't invent that term, but in his use of it, you didn't need further explanation. You knew exactly what he was talking about. That term fits the kind of Christianity that has infected the church and sapped it of its vitality and strength. The expression might offend the sensibilities of some of my readers, to which I can only say, it might fit you. I urge you instead to be offended by the way our God's name is blasphemed in the country every day, by the 54 million children murdered in the Holocaust of abortion since 1973, by the sordid sexual agenda that's eroding the very fabric of Western civilization, by the fact that Christians are dying for their faith, largely at the hands of Muslims, at a rate of 100,000 per year, and most of all by the reality that these things are being ignored, trivialized, or celebrated. These are things that offend me deeply, and I hope they offend you too. Righteous anger has a place within the Christian life. Tap into it. In the words of Ephesians 4:26, quote, be angry and do not sin, or do not sin in your anger. Evangelical Christians comprise a hefty 26% of the U.S. population, according to polls. I fully believe that if they were to find their voices, their courage, and were to dispense with candy-blanked Christianity, that we would see a great awakening in America. Indeed, we would see America become truly great again rather than superficially so. But it will, as I say, require courage, because the forces opposing us seem determined to burn this country to the ground. That cannot go unchallenged. When Jesus said to turn the other cheek, he didn't mean to turn a blind eye. The highest calling of a Christian is not to be civil, it is to be salt and light. All right, so there you go. Now, I agree with what he says. The only thing I don't agree with is of all the things that his dad says, I wish he could have come up with an example that didn't involve curse words, okay? So in that's the one thing I don't agree with. But other than that, I think he makes a very fair point, okay? And I've talked about this for years on the show, and for over 16 years, folks, you've heard me say this, that we need to be willing to be an offense for the gospel. We need to stop trying so hard to fit in and trying so hard to get an unbelieving world to, quote, like us, that somehow we stop being salt and light in the world.